In fact,
Yeah.
we're going to press this button, and theoretically, we're here. We're on stream. We're live. People can hear our voices. Dominic, can people in the chat? Hello, everyone in the chat. Can you hear Dominic? Dominic, can
Hello.
you're here? Excellent. That's good. We're cooking on gas. Right. Well, the slightly jiggled up format, everyone, means I'm trying to reduce the runtime by reducing the amount of time that I can go off on a faff one. So Dominic is here. You're all here. It seems to be working. Without further ado, let's crack on to tonight's episode. Welcome to tonight's Rail Natter, everyone. There it is. As the Intercity 225 fades away. Oh, we go. Well, we're tonight. We're talking about this fine place, Scandinavia, which is, well, this isn't just Scandinavia is not a country. It's not even a particularly well defined. I mean, okay, you can define it by a few countries, but actually, it's weirdly defined. It's like a generic name for a large area. But we'll get to that. We will get to defining what the hell Scandinavia is momentarily, because first, we must do the news. And we're going to get cracking straight into it. So the first thing to say is that the Transport Select Committee, their report on the Integrated Rail Plan is out, which is quite exciting. It says some very bold things that I really was not expecting. Yeah, Dominic, I had my first experience in the House of Commons giving evidence. So I'd been a few times doing various behind-the-scenes stuff and prodding MPs and making a nuisance of myself. This is the first time that I was on Parliament.live, whatever it is, actually making a nuisance of myself in kind of on record and in Hansard, or actually I don't know if it is in Hansard, but it's in the records of the TSA, and it was all right actually. I quite enjoyed myself. It was good, and what's more important than that is the fact that it seems to have cut through, because I get quoted 13 times in the lucky for some in the report directly, and lots of the messages that I've been banging the drum of cut through and reassuringly are then backed up by all the other. What's quite nice is they've led with my quote, which is a bit fiery, and then they've coming in behind all that is all the other groups that were giving evidence and back up what I said. So it's really quite a powerful bit of report, actually. I'm quite pleased. I was expecting it to be not necessarily a cop-out, but just a bit softer, and it's been pretty savage, to be honest. Have you been following the chaos that is the Integrated Rail Plan at all?
I have a wee bit, and I'm not going to say who it is. I have a family member who's actually actually working within government, and I get a few choice excerpts from that. But it's interesting, actually. I mean, being, first of all, usually I'm based in Scotland, as you know, and that is a slightly different discourse around transport. And then being over here in Sweden at the moment, you look at the UK and it really just become clear about how dysfunctional some of the central planning of these really big questions is, because not only are these massive 20, 30-year decisions made seemingly on on a turn of a sixpence, but that they're so obviously deeply politicized as well.
Absolutely.
And I think if you spend any time outside the UK and you come back to the UK, you see this is valid for so much, not just transport. And again, like living in Scotland, a lot of the discussions about high-speed rail seem completely academic anyway, because it's of so little benefit if you live in Edinburgh or Glasgow.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's deeply frustrating, and I think we'll come to this later in the episode. Actually, it's kind of relevant to the way that decision making is made in Sweden and in other parts of Scandinavia that I think we'll touch back on. So we'll store that one up and release it momentarily, folks in the chat. But yes, there is going to be a page turn on this one. There are quite a lot of very juicy quotes. I thought I'd pull this one out, which is fun. Paragraph 87: journey time reductions, albeit not to the same degree as promised by previous plans, are a headline benefit of the Integrated Rail Plan. We received detailed evidence that cast doubt on the plausibility of the times achievable under the new plans. We asked the government to publish its full technical appraisals of the feasibility of these reductions so that communities and stakeholders can have confidence that they are achievable in practice. That's Select Committee speak for you're speaking bollocks, government, and a lot of very clever people have just told us you are, and we're unconvinced that you're not speaking bollocks. So yeah, I was quite pleased about it, particularly as their reference. Anyway, yeah, well, there will be a page turn, folks. You're asking the chat, everyone in the chat. Yes, there will be a page turn, and Dave, it does mention Manchester Underground Station. I wrote a thread this morning, which my weirdly misbehaving Twitter app on my phone just deleted. So I thought, I can't write that again. I hate writing threads twice. I'll just do a summary tweet, and I'll come back to it in a future reel now. Anyway, enough of that. Oh god, yeah, my face. I forgot I'd done this. This was a bit of a holding picture, and I was trying to find another one. But anyway, yeah, I was on the news talking about the strikes because the strikes have just happened. Oh, I was going to put a picture of the actual crew who were. I'm going to do this right now because I can. Where is it? This lovely lot. Yeah, here they are. Look, it's this lot. There, I went and took a selfie this morning with the crew and bought them a load of cookies that are in the bottom corner. You can see the cookies down there. It's very nice, isn't it? Anyway, yeah, I got them some breakfast because everyone's out striking again, and there's lots we can discuss about this. And I think we're going to get into trade unionism a bit as well, Dominic, aren't we? So we'll kind of get to that. But I did a video. This video is on YouTube. People can go and watch it. I clipped my BBC News appearance to talk about that. And then obviously Labour, the leader of the opposition the office of the leader of the opposition had to take the stupidest approach possible, which is to, right at the point where the strikes are increasingly cutting through, they had to make the story about themselves again, which was by sacking Shadow Transport Minister who had backed the rail strikes. Just mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. It's not 3D chess, folks, it's incompetence. Anyway, breathe. Anyway, right, enough of that. Dominic, let's talk about Scandinavia. Scandinavia. Oh, let's get our wee faces up as well. In fact, before we do that, Dominic, hello. People can see you. I'm incredibly pink because it's so roasting here. Your camera's fine, actually. Everyone, before this, Dominic was apologising for the state of the camera. Your camera's fine. It's absolutely fine. It'll do. Dominic, tell everyone who you are and introduce yourself to the RailNatter audience.
So, I am. Anybody who follows me on Twitter will know I'm a sociologist. I teach sociology of media and journalism at University of Glasgow in Scotland. But I'm also a journalist going back 15 years, basically, and worked quite a long time in Germany, but mostly in Scandinavia, working out of Stockholm, but covering all of Scandinavia. And you may be wondering why I'm here on a railway podcast. The story is long, but it's actually linked to some of the other stuff. So I came to Sweden for the first time because my dad is a rolling stock engineer, or he was. He's retired now. And back in the late 90s, when everybody was deregulating everything, the bit of British Rail that he worked for got bought by somebody who then seconded him to come and work in Sweden for a bit of the Swedish railway they were contracted to run. So I pitched up here, 14 years old, not knowing my ass from my elbow, and I thought it was quite nice. And that was that. And then when I'd always wanted to be a journalist, but I went to uni. Turns out I went to uni at the same time as Gareth, but we never actually met each other face to face. Just like ships in the night. Yeah. And I ended up becoming a specialist in Northern Europe, basically. But the best thing is that because journalism involves a lot of travel, you get to spend a lot of time on trains. So involuntarily, or I would say semi-voluntarily, I've ended up becoming a kind of expert on Nordic rail travel just by the fact that I've taken probably most trains that you can take in the Nordic countries at some point. And I'm right now here in Stockholm doing a bit of work, and it seemed like an opportune time to talk about Nordic railways.
Absolutely, yeah. We've been talking on and off about doing this for ages now. Doing some sort of collaboration and doing a RailNatter for ages. And this, as you say, this kind of feels like everything's neatly fallen into place for you to sort of now that you're back over there and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is really the zenith of my career. It's all downhill after this. So.
Yeah, no, I don't know about that. I've no idea what the destiny of RailNatter is. At some point, it might choke, but it hasn't yet. I've done one every single week since I started doing it without fail.
I hope you get optioned by Radio 4. This is the kind of nice afternoon content we need on a Sunday.
Oh, I get too excited. I get too pink and excitable for Radio 4. I think maybe Radio 5 will have me. Who knows? But yeah. Anyway, right. We'll get lost otherwise. Let's return to Scandinavia and ask the question: what is a Scandinavia? What is it?
What is a Scandinavia? What is a Sweden?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Actually, I better get my John Maddening out. Let's get the old pen. But yeah, here is a small and slightly weirdly laid out map of Scandinavia. It consists of a few countries. Dominic, how would you describe Scandinavia? And is Scandinavia an annoying term for people from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, and also Finland that isn't highlighted here that sometimes gets wrapped in, and Iceland, etc.?
Technically, Scandinavia is a kind of cultural unit, so it's really to do with languages. And as listeners will probably know, Denmark and Norway and Sweden share what are essentially all dialects of the same core language. And to an extent, that also extends out to Iceland and the Faroe Islands, although those split off a long time ago linguistically. Finland is part of the Nordic countries, but they're very, very keen to tell you that they're not Scandinavian, and that's because Finnish culture and Finnish, I won't be that reductive, but Finnish language is very different. As Gareth has just pointed out there, drawing the route of the soon-to-maybe-be-built Estonia-Helsinki tunnel.
Yes.
Finland and Finnish and Estonian are quite similar. But then you kind of get into the what in Sweden they call Baltikum, so the Baltic states as well. And actually, rather than talk about Scandinavia as a whole, you can really see it as a kind of series of continua that flow into one another. So there's quite a big difference between like Finland and Iceland. But then, between Denmark and Norway and the Atlantic Scandinavian states, there's quite a lot of going on. However, Iceland and Faroe Islands don't have any railways in, so for the purposes of this podcast, they're completely useless.
They're gone. They're off the case.
We're going to talk about the real deal, which is the mainland Scandinavian Nordic countries. But also, I mean, if you want to understand the history of Scandinavia, and particularly Sweden, or the modern history, railways are quite a good way to go about it, as we'll come on to.
Nice. Okay. Yeah.
But whenever some people talk about Scandinavia, I think they've got specific preconceptions. And I would say this because I'm a specialist, but like every area of the world, it's much more diverse and actually much more complex, and there's much more difference between each bit than you might expect. It's really. I mean, a couple of years ago, I wrote a book about Sweden, moderately well-selling, critically noticed book. I sort of tried to do that in the book, basically, to talk a lot about what people's preconceptions are about Sweden in particular, but Scandinavia more generally, and just really show that they're quite normal places.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, there's nothing special about Swedish people or any other kind of Scandinavian, but that a lot of the stuff that people like about the Nordic countries is the result of actually quite kind of banal everyday decisions. It's not high politics necessarily. And it's not down to hygge or lifestyle or having candles and cakes either.
I went to Sweden and the food was excellent. I didn't get a chance to explore Stockholm properly because I was being whisked around on a press tour. But I did briefly get fika on around where would it have been? Probably around about possibly here, somewhere here. I can't exactly remember. I know that it was like an hour and a half north of Stockholm. In any case, my Stockholm geography ain't great.
Was that at the Railway Museum?
Oh, no, maybe it's further. No, it wasn't. It was right the way up. Actually, maybe it was much further north because this map's a bit confusing. And actually, I've got confused where Stockholm is. So actually, maybe quite a lot further north.
Anybody listening and wants to go to the Swedish Railway Museum, it's in a town called Gävle.
Gävleborg is where I went to. So yes, it was not that town, but it was that area. Gävle is like up here on the coast, isn't it? It's like up somewhere. This map's squished and it's confusing.
It's just about where you put your first circle.
This one here. That's
the thing about Sweden is that it's weird because some places seem really far away because the transport's bad, and some places seem really near.
Also map projection is stupid for this part of the world as well.
Yeah. So the map of Sweden you've got here actually makes Stockholm look like it's a long way up, and it's not. The the northern Sweden is massive. So the distance from the top of Sweden to the bottom of Sweden is like driving from London to Rome. It's about 1,400 kilometers, and it's really interesting to see that people come to Sweden and they think they're going out in the wilderness because they've gone an hour outside of Stockholm. If you want to experience wild, landscapes in Europe, go to northern Sweden because it is empty and it's beautiful, and you can get a train directly there.
Yeah, and the trains are, as we will discuss. Oh, in fact, no. Are they good? Are they not good? Let us move on to talk about the infrastructure, because it's theoretically a railway podcast. Dominic,
yes.
What is this, and why should people? In fact, viewers of the architecture the railways built should recognise this actually. But Dominic, tell us about this interesting.
This
icon.
This is the antiquated. I think this is from the 50s, and this is the symbol for SJ. So. The Swedish state railway company, and I basically chose this image partly because it's kind of harks back to the golden age of rail travel, but also because in Sweden, like the state and the crown and the infrastructure has been very heavily linked, so that the state was a really big factor in opening up large parts of Sweden, which until 20th century was like a big, remote, inaccessible country, and the railways just transformed Sweden because suddenly it meant that all of the kind of industrial stuff that was out there could be accessed. And if you go to any of the kind of so Sweden doesn't really have steam railways like you do in the UK, and it would be fair to say people's train interest is a bit lower. But if you go to a lot of the kind of railways, what they do in Sweden a lot of the time, they get kind of really lightly used railway lines or semi-disused ones, and they run trains on them at the weekends just as a kind of hobby thing. And if you go to one of those, you'll definitely see this shade of orange, and you'll definitely see this symbol. So I think it encapsulates a very specific kind of ideal about sort of 1950s Sweden as well, which is very powerful. And even today, people kind of hark back to that time as a golden age in terms of kind of what the country was, what it was doing, and when everything worked. Now, that's not the case. We know that's not the case. It can't possibly be so. But I think one of the things that's really strong in Sweden today is the idea that at some point in the mid-20th century, it kind of peaked, and that a lot of politics and a lot of kind of discussion is about going back to that, trying to recreate that in some form.
That sounds familiar somehow.
Yeah, I know it's weird, isn't it? And it's sort of weaponized nostalgia. And previously, it was quite harmless. But what we've seen in the last sort of 10 years in Sweden is an increasing kind of like almost British style, national conservatism, which has grown. And it's funny because I've got a kind of insider-outsider perspective in Sweden. I mean, I'm not Swedish. But you really kind of see the aesthetics of it all as well. And the other thing I should say about Sweden is there's this kind of idea that it's the most modern country in the world, and this is an idea that's been around since the 20s really, maybe even earlier. So this becomes a kind of self-sustaining prophecy in Swedish public life. And you'll quite often hear people say that Sweden is, at the forefront of technology and modernity and everything else, which is one of the reasons why this podcast was called Railways and Modernity in Scandinavia, because you can't really separate the two. And it's I think if you're gonna get on a train in Sweden today, it's really interesting to think about kind of what the actual kind of semiotics of that are as well.
It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting to see. Firstly, it's interesting to see how the attitudes towards a country reflect onto a country, because that's something that I don't know if that does happen in the UK quite as much, because I think I think there's such a lack of looking outwards that perhaps happens in the general psyche, but it's interesting that it happens in Sweden, because there is that view across right across the political spectrum, actually, from leftists right the way across to people on the right who have this vision of what Sweden is and can achieve. It is interesting. This is also a very nice orange.
It is.
It's good. It is very nice. I like that a lot. Yeah. And so it's interesting you talk about the way that the railways built up as well, and maybe we'll touch on this momentarily, but it's interesting that you talk about the way that unlike Britain, unlike England, Wales and Scotland, where the network was entirely private enterprise and chaos and zero strategic view, was it the case that there was a complete strategic view of railway construction in Sweden, or was there just a much stronger intervention? Were there still duplications and bad choices, or was it an entirely strategically laid out rail network?
There were plenty of bad choices. I mean, even today, like some of the routes through Sweden, the long distance routes, are really really dysfunctional because they were made first and foremost to carry military traffic in the event of invasion. So they were set back from the coasts, and that was a mistake. That was a mistake that took Sweden a long time to correct. So for years, for example, if you got the train up to the far north of Sweden, you take this really, really long and winding route. And so although it wasn't that far, you could only get the night trains because the day trains would have taken about 12 hours. And what basically happened is that as you get in lots of European countries, the state progressively took over more and more of the railway operators until it owned everything. Really, there are very few places in Sweden, to my knowledge, that had private railways that ran for a long time. A couple of mineral lines, stuff like that. But I think in a country like this, where you've got relatively few cities, big distances, it's very very hard to run railways in a commercially viable way on an individual basis anyway. So the only way to make money or to not lose loads of money is to basically club together and have a national organisation that cross-subsidises, much like in Scotland, actually, where there's only a couple of routes where it's possible to actually make a profit. And, the political conversation in Scotland accepts implicitly that, we are going to have to subsidise trains if we want to have them. And it's very much similar here. I mean, you've got huge tracts of the country that would be inaccessible without the railways, whilst at the same time, there isn't a hope in hell that those railways will ever break even.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting to right. First, Lin Man Fu. I am going to audio describe this logo. You're right. I should do that, and I'll do it in great detail. Dominic and I will both do it momentarily. But just to pick up on the last point there, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting how that does not propagate in England. Wales get it, Scotland get it. I don't think. Okay, lots of people obviously it does, but I think generally the political discussion is still a lot of people see the railways as being a private entity. I don't know if that harks back to kind of that the damaging nostalgia view of individual railway companies and that being it's interesting to unpick, but we're not here to unpick. It's always interesting to hold a mirror up and use other countries as a lens to look back at the UK, but we're not going to do much more of that. We are going to already describe this logo though. So to start with, in the centre of this wonderful gold, kind of embossed logo, it looks like a piece of brass or kind of painted gold painted metal and set onto a bit of nicely orange painted steel. There is a gold crown sat on top of a kind of hovering actually above what I can only describe as a winged railway wheel. What looks like quite a nice conicity rail wheel with wings coming out of its axle either side.
Basically, it's a wheel that's flying and it's also a king. So it's What
is there not to like?
Yeah, it's similar to the one that if you go to the central station in Copenhagen, there's a very similar symbol that the Copenhagen railways, the Danish railways had, as part of this kind of high modernism, of like speed and steel and steam. Although in Sweden it was electric and diesel, but it's quite sexy actually. And I think going back to what I was saying earlier about kind of the aesthetics of modernity, you can really tell a story about where society was based on looking at the trains at the time and how they were designed, because they were designed as an integral part of this kind of industrial project that was going to make people's lives better and revolutionise the country.
Yeah, and it's worth saying the aesthetic of this is a mixture, because there's a mixture of the craft of the crown is quite detailed and that, but the wings, the shape of the wings. I mean, I suppose the easiest way to visually to describe it is that there is something of a socialist aesthetic actually, even though this very much was not really necessarily a socialist organisation. There is an element of that Soviet-esque imagery of the wings and actually you see quite a lot of that in the UK in the 1920s and 30s. You see some of this style of art. I'm not a good enough art person to be able to say what that style is.
No, you're totally right though. I mean, if you go and look at a couple of years ago, I was at the Nasarella Museum with a family, and It's just, if anyone listens is from a railway family, they'll know that that's just something that you do every so often.
Absolutely.
The whole family goes somewhere. A segue, but after my brother's wedding, the whole family decamped to the Illinois Railway Museum in Chicago just because. This was literally the day after he got married. He has a lot of tolerance. And it's America's biggest railway museum, they tell me, father. So it's a good day out. But it's
the wings on Coronation Scott look like this. Is one thing.
Exactly. They had this amazing exhibition on 30s modernism and streamlining and design, which is what the NRM does so well. Actually, people think it's just a big hall with trains in. It's not. It's an amazing social record, of what's going on throughout the 20th century, really. And it's the same here. And one of the things that Sweden's famous for is design and technology, and you really see it as kind of embodied modernism, which gets a bit lost in the UK for a couple of reasons. But things look futuristic as well, and there's an attempt to make them seem futuristic.
Yeah. So from this grand edifice, or rather logo on a train, we head to ABBA.
We've got this picture just because when I say to people that in the 1970s, British Rail recruited ABBA, who at the time were one of the biggest selling bands in the world, to front Keep Britain Tidy or Keep Your Station Tidy campaign, nobody believes you. So you have to show them the picture, to make it seem legit.
Wow.
And I think the only reason that ABBA agreed to this is because Britain has such a weirdly, Britain's kind of placed on a strange cultural pedestal in Sweden. So, to be invited by the UK national rail operator to endorse a cleaning campaign was probably quite a big deal for them.
Yeah, and this very much, for anyone who listens to Trash Future, which is a lot of the listeners, oh my God, this sums up so much like Britain is basically all about the bins. It just continues to build on that ethos. But anyway, there we go, ABBA, keeping Britain tidy. Wild. Anyway, right, this is what some of the people came here for.
Now we get to the good stuff.
Yeah, this is where we start rubbing our thighs, which is looking at an ancient bit of electrification, a very snazzy bit of rolling stock, and some quite nice scenery if you're into kind of the mass Nordic forestry style. Which I would say
if you don't like trees and lakes, Sweden is not the country for you. Because that's all we've got. So this is the X2000, so the X2000, the Swedish high-speed train, and it's interesting. I noticed that in your intro there you've got pictures of the East Coast, the Class 92 and the ATP, both of which actually share technology with these trains, because these were built by ASEA, which became ABB. Which everyone will know is a really big Swedish technology company. But the some of the tech that's in them for the tilting was actually developed by British Rail in Derby, which is another connection that's unexpected between my family and Sweden. But these trains were introduced in the early 1990s, and in a lot of places. By the early 90s, the railways in Sweden were at quite a low ebb. They were being beaten on price and time by domestic flights. People were driving. The motorway network had improved. It was a familiar story. Yeah. And so SJ, who at that time, they were still owned by the government, but they were really told they needed to buck their ideas up. So they came up with the idea of this kind of plane on wheels. And they wanted to offer airline-style service and, to an extent, passenger times to your average kind of big city and city commuter. And so they came up with this, which was quite remarkable. It was completely, bearing in mind Sweden at that time only had 9 million people in. So this isn't Germany, this isn't France. This is quite a small country. Yeah. They came up with their own high-speed train, and they developed it from scratch, pretty much. And it tilts. So Sweden has some quite windy railways, and they couldn't afford to build new lines. So what they did is they just decided to speed everything up. And it was a huge success. It basically saved SJ and got people taking trains again, rescued their image. But these things are still in service today. I mean, they're all, they're 30 years old now, but they don't look it, and they've just been refurbished and completely redone. And I was on one the other day actually, coming up to Stockholm, one of the new ones, and they're really beautiful inside. But they're interesting for me because they are kind of there's a lot of pride in Sweden about Swedish technology, Swedish products, Swedish design as well. And the X2000 embodied that. And I was speaking to a colleague of mine who was kind of quite young, like I was in the early 90s. And, they remember them being launched and they were this kind of really big deal. They're one of these things where actually, if you say the words X2000, it's a bit like saying Intercity 125 in the UK. Yeah. Even people who've got no interest in the railways would be like, oh yeah, I know what that is.
They know what that is, exactly. It's an iconic name. It's an image that people recognise. It's nice because they are contemporary. They are essentially contemporaries of the Intercity 225 of the Class 9. So there is technology in there. The Class 91 has quite a lot of ABB kit in it. Yeah. There is a lot of and as you say, the tilting is Derby origin. There's people in the chat saying there's basically two. There are basically two types of tilting tech that currently operate in the world. One of them is Talgo's weird mechanical doodad, and the other is Derby origin. And that then went back to Italy, went across to Sweden, and everyone else used it, and we then bought it later. But that's another story.
As is our want.
As is our style. And it is an iconic bit of kit, and it's interesting that it's a similar story. It's a small country, can't afford new high speed rail, so they. I suppose they benefit in ways that the UK is different. The lack of density helps because you don't necessarily have as many of the challenges with suburban services that mixing on the existing lines that these have to deal with. They do have to deal with freight, but freight is a little bit easier to deal with because you can kind of put it onto a passing loop, which isn't the same for a suburban service. So there are benefits that allowed this to work better. But it's a similar story. There were a lot of upgrades, as you say, in the late 80s and early 90s, I think, wasn't it? That there were a lot of upgrades to basically bring a lot of the railways up to about the same as we have. So there were 200 kilometre an hour sort of line speeds in lots of places, which I think is about as fast as these get, isn't it?
I think they're designed to go. They're designed to operate usually at between sort of 120 and 180 kilometers an hour, sometimes a bit higher. They can go. There's a couple of new bits of railway in Sweden that are usually quite short, like 20, 30 miles long each, where they can go faster. But the real problem is, I'm not an expert on this. From what I understand, is the signalling. So the fastest bit of railway in Sweden is probably the bit actually in the north of Sweden, which is brand new, where it is, because the distances are so big. And we'll go on to this as well. But they just built a high-speed railway through a really rural area because they could, and it cost a ton of money, but it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Oh, that's one. We'll get there. We will get there, though. So this is a lovely scene. We're going to jump to another image, though. Why is this wagon in the air? Tell us about it. What's going on here?
It's in the air because this is going back to academic stuff. There is an academic who sadly passed away a few years ago, an American geographer called Alan Pred, and he's probably the foremost writer on Sweden and modernity. So he wrote a really good book called Montages of the Present, which is about the way that Sweden's constantly reinvented itself to appear modern and has had at various points throughout the 20th century these big exhibitions where people from around the world were invited to Sweden to see Swedish technology, Swedish housing, look at the social innovations. This is a carriage without wheels, as you can tell. The reason it's not on wheels is it's actually mounted above an exhibition floor. It's been cut off, but there's actually, I think, a bus underneath it. And this is in one of the pavilions at the Stockholm exhibition in, I think this is from the early 30s, this one. And at the time, this would, this steel-bodied coach would have been state-of-the-art.
Yes, I see. Yeah.
And it's actually a sleeping wagon, so a sleeping coach. I don't know if you can see it. And I think, am I right in saying it's actually only half a coach, and they've chopped the other half off?
Oh, okay. I was going to say it's quite stubby for a coach in the period, but actually this end they've lopped the end off. Yeah.
And it was, this is kind of, for me, typifies a lot of what is you see a lot of the time in Sweden, which is this real, in this case, literally putting technology on a pedestal,
Yeah.
and then trying to sell it to people. But it was also kind of a golden age, where this is pre-war, so this is the golden age of European cosmopolitanism, where you can, go to the railway station and get on an express which links up with the ferry, so you can go to Copenhagen, you can go to Berlin, you can get a train that connects with a boat to go to St. Petersburg. There is a real, it's not available to everybody, but there's a real kind of sexiness to international travel and to rail travel as well, because it's the thing that links everything together at that time were completely unprecedented speeds.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at the history of transport more generally, we often forget, because we become so desensitized to it today, that even going into the 20s and 30s, being able to get from London to Edinburgh in 7 hours was a revelation. Compared to how it had been 20 years before. So, we complain about how trains haven't really got better since the 80s, which is true in some ways. But the rate of technological change was so high between kind of 1880s and the 1930s that a lot of this would have been unrecognizable. And I'm a sociologist in modernity loosely. That's one of the things I'm interested in. And modernity is like a concertina. Sometimes it's stretched out. Sometimes it's very condensed and quick.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
And one of the things you see about this period is that things are happening very quickly. The future's coming at you very quickly. And largely it's a positive thing. Until the Second World War comes along, people are feeling pretty good about stuff. I know there's a recession, but even so, like, modernism carries on. And Sweden also, I wouldn't say it sits out the Second World War, but one of the reasons Sweden ends up being so rich is that it comes through the Second World War as virtually the only country in Western Europe to have a developed industrial economy that's completely intact.
Yeah.
And they make hay. The 50s is the golden age.
Yeah. It's I mean, there's plenty to unpick in that one sentence, of course, but I think that's for another time. But it's this image for me captures a lot about something that, again, I don't bring it back to the UK. It's something that we just aren't good at anymore. We aren't good at, government leaves it to private enterprise to go and sell itself. And we have the made in. What's funny is we used to have made in Great Britain or great. There's like a Great Britain campaign, and someone has finally pointed out to whichever branch of government that is that runs that it completely ignores Northern Ireland, which is also part of this country theoretically. And so they've changed it to Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the whole thing doesn't work very well. But anyway, there is so little done by to kind of actually talk about what is good. What are the good things? It's cannot see. The government cannot see what's right in front of its nose about what is good and what it can sell and what is exciting, and it's left to industries to do it. And you don't get these sorts of publicly available sort of exhibitions like we used to send stuff out. Even British Rail had sent their trains to the continent. When we were still proud of stuff that we did on the railways.
When I was a kid, maybe I remember reading in one of the railway magazines my dad used to get that. They'd sent Sprinter trains to Germany for an exhibition, or Netherlands maybe, because they were at that time. They were leading. And I think one of the things as well is that if you look at the way that the Nordic economies work, they're not perfect, and there have been the same problems with overseas buyers coming in and, stuff being offshored. But there's still some industries which are basically national champions. So if we look at renewable energy, for example, in Denmark, the Danish government has allowed a couple of big companies to basically become world leaders and actively facilitated them doing so, on the understanding that by and large they will kind of be loyal to Denmark. And that's why, Denmark makes so much money off renewable energy in terms of both generation and export of technology. Yeah. Whereas Scotland, which is, has lots of wind farms, has virtually no domestic actors who are making wind turbines and developing tech and exporting that, because it's something that just hasn't been supported over the past 30 years. And this isn't just a UK government problem, this is a Scottish government problem as well. And I think that Scotland's very big on nostalgia about its industrial past. It's very hard to shift the conversation into kind of, well, okay, what does a well-designed heavy industrial high-tech economy look like, and how do we get there? And Denmark is an example of that, but Sweden does it very well as well. It is still today an industrial and technological powerhouse. Even if it doesn't make so much anymore, it still engineers a lot.
Absolutely, and it's interesting. I mean, grew up around Aberdeen, and that for me embodies, the trajectory of Aberdeen now absolutely embodies the lack of any vision in Scotland for what a high tech but also high industry economy might look like. Scotland could lead the world in tidal energy, and I just see a lot of let the universities run it and very little interest from government to actually champion it, because you cannot, if you want something to thrive, you can't just leave the universities only have so much cash, and they have even less cash now. They are not going to be able to turn something. There are going to be very few moments where something jumps from university to reality out there, and it needs government to get behind it and champion it. Absolutely.
Totally. I'm at Glasgow Uni. I'm part of the interestingly titled Infrastructure Reading Group, and it's basically a group of us who are interested in broad questions of infrastructure and society, and we get together and we talk about stuff, which is great, and that's what universities are really good for. But we've done a lot of critical discussion of what's going on in Scotland, and so much of it is just vibes. There's no real sense of a project. I think it's partly because in the kind of contemporary political space in the UK, which in some ways is extremely post-political. I mean, if you look at Keir Starmer, for example, he's somebody who thinks that to be acceptable in politics, you essentially have to not have any politics. But as soon as you lose the connection to any kind of material reality in terms of what needs to be done, it's really hard to make big decisions about where the country's going. And I think that is, in Scotland, something the SNP have had to deal with as well, is that they've been really good at projecting kind of broad ideas, broad values. But when it comes to actually making big decisions and, taking the economy forward or taking, industry somewhere, it hasn't really happened.
Yeah, and all too often they've fallen back on some of their older ideals about, pro-car and and all this stuff.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And this is why I don't want to digress too much, but like during the COP in Glasgow, when the Scottish government was doing a big kind of PR campaign to make itself look great, you looked around and you're like, well, actually, very few of the things being profiled here are anything directly to do with the government or with economic policy, and so much of it works against it. One of the refreshing things about being back in Sweden is that you can go to the end of the street and get on a bus that'll take you to the metro station that'll take you into town and not think twice about it. And Swedes, together with the Dutch, are like this as well. They're quite spoiled and they don't even realize it, because this is not how it is in most countries. But the UK, I think, is particularly bad at this, and understanding that these kind of like measures, which are nominally, environmental, also just make your life much better as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is something which you just don't see mentioned in the UK.
Yeah, it's so much to unpick. I knew this would be a good one, Dominic. I knew it'd be a good one. Right, let us go to apologies for the slight rationing of pixels, but I think this is nice and clear. Everyone fuzz up your eyes a little bit. It's fine. Tell us about what we can see, because I see some modern things in a black and white photo here. I see lots of newly built concrete. I see slab track. I see a suburban train. Tell me what's going on.
So this is from the 50s, late 50s, and I dug this out because I was down the other day in a suburb in southern Stockholm called Bandhagen, where a friend of mine lives, and it's a kind of beautifully preserved 1950s model suburb. What happened? Because
there's social housing in the background as well, by the look of it. So
yeah, it's social housing. So, but Sweden doesn't have council housing like in the UK. So instead of the council building stuff, you have these large housing organisations that build. They're basically, a lot of them are cooperatives. Some of them make money, but they build housing, and the government kind of facilitates it. And then you get your rental contract and you pay in. And in fact, the flat I'm in right now, which belongs to a colleague, is one of those. This one's, I think, from the late 60s, but very similar vibe, like really well built, affordable at that point anyway. But what happened in Stockholm in the 50s is that the Social Democrats got into government in the 30s. They didn't come out of government until the mid 70s. And that was only for a couple of very short parliaments. So essentially they were in power for 4 decades. Or 4.5 decades. That meant that they could push through big projects that a UK Labour government's never been able to do in terms of, large scale social reform. it happened in other places in Sweden, but in Stockholm, what happened from a fairly early stage in the 50s onwards was they just built loads and loads of really high quality new build housing in these kind of little pockets in the woods, basically, and connected it all up with this, at the time, revolutionary brand new metro system. Now, in some ways, it's quite Soviet, right? You know, you look at the metros in all these random cities in Russia that were built in the 50s and 60s. It's a very similar vibe. But because it was, you know, social democratic rather than communist, it was a little bit more kind of lifestyle based as well. So these housing areas have like really lovely little arcades, and they've got all the facilities you could want. But you know, you can also go out to the shops or go into town and do whatever you want to do. And the Stockholm as it is today would not exist without this metro system, which was really like a massive piece of social engineering. And I think if you sort of go to these suburbs, you'll see that in pretty much every one, the metro station is at the centre, and that you'll come out of the metro station into your main square or onto your high street, which was built that way. But unlike, you know, you look at something like the Metropolitan line in London, which was built originally as a kind of way to facilitate land sales, you know, to developing suburbs in many ways. It's the same kind of outcome, but a very different motivation. And as a result, the communities that grow up around them are quite different as well. There's been some problems. So where I live today, where I am right now, this is on the Red Line, which is like Western Stockholm. That was built a bit later in the 70s, and so or the 60s and 70s. So the housing blocks out here are bigger and a bit more brutalist, and they've had more social problems and stuff. But these original suburbs on the south side of Stockholm or the northwest side of Stockholm have become really bougie nowadays. And are really, really nice places to live. But also, I mean, Stockholmers, they love their transport. So, you know, the thing that will really sink it for you, if you get elected here, the thing that will really sink it for you in terms of people's everyday lives is if you mess up the metro system or the trams or the buses. And
I mean, I've just inserted a slide casually while you're talking, kind of describing the story, to remind people kind of what the Stockholm. So I've travelled on the Stockholm metro, and it is amazing. It is just glorious, and it's very much like it's very much, and Crossrail achieved this to an extent, although, you know, in comparison in a little more of a kind of a sterile way, but the Stockholm metro it's not just a transport system. It's showing by its design, by its attitude, and I think this is a bigger picture thing in Sweden as well. But correct me on this: is that the public transport system, certainly in terms of the metro, is part of the beating heart of the city. It's seen as like, and the underground in London, I think, is part of that. People see it as part of the art, you know, art on the underground, and these things. That public transport is not just a transport system. It has to be. It should look good. It should feel good.
Yeah.
People should feel happy and proud about it.
It's not an option for those who can't drive. You know, it's the primary mode of transport.
Yeah.
What you've actually, in that picture you put in there, that's one of my dad's trains, so I'll be very happy about that.
Oh, nice.
I think they're called C30s. I'll have to double check, but
nice.
that was the train that kickstarted my relationship with Sweden. Anyway, the other thing to mention about Stockholm subway station is that this is a bit bleaker. Like a lot of places in central Stockholm, they also double as nuclear shelters. So during the Cold War, Sweden had a policy of basically trying to get everyone underground and protected in the event of a nuclear strike, because Sweden itself wasn't at war with the Soviet Union, so there was no danger of them being directly targeted for the most part. But they were worried about invasion, and they were worried about knock-on effects from nuclear conflict all around. And if you go to a lot of apartment blocks in Sweden, you'll find that in the basements, because everything's built on this really hard rock, they've dug out these basically fallout bomb shelters. But also the subway stations, not every single one of them, but some of them actually are designed to double as refuges as well. So in the event of a national emergency, when you need to get 100,000 people underground within 20 minutes, they can do it. And it's really, I've had someone visiting me here a couple of weeks ago, and I was showing them around, and their face just, they went ghostly white when I explained this. But it was because there was like, I think, we've all seen the film Threads, where it becomes quite clear the British government don't really care about the survival of the average person. here it was the opposite. There was a genuine national plan in place to save people in the event of a nuclear attack and get them to safety, and then allow them to live underground for a couple of weeks at a time. And if you go into the Stockholm metro system with that in mind, it changes how you look at it, because you're like, okay, well, there's a reason why there's all these big cavern. Obviously there's train stopping, but you can quite easily see how it could be turned into, a hospital or a food store, whatever you needed it to be.
It's interesting. It's like pushing so it's really taking that idea that public transport is more than just public transport to the next level.
Yeah.
It's that echoes somewhat of what the underground was in London, but the underground, it was retrofitted, whereas in this situation, this is very much part of the brief. A problem we have in Britain is that we aren't allowed to build our public transport to be anything other than slightly less than public transport. But that's another story. So we're going to hop to the next image. I am editing on the fly. Here is what should be a familiar view to a lot of people, I think. But so we popped in a picture here. There was a picture in here before, but it was a bit pixely, so I've swapped in. Hopefully, I've still captured what you intended me to. So tell us about this particular massive bridge.
This is the bridge. This is the bridge. This is the Øresund Bridge from Denmark to Sweden, which was not uncontroversial when it was built and was really expensive, but has completely revolutionized it, because it used to be quite difficult to get from Denmark to Sweden. You had to kind of sit on these ferries, and they sort of chugged across. And whereas now you can go from city centre in Copenhagen to city centre in Malmö in 22 minutes on a regional train. And it's just completely changed how people think of southern Sweden, which until the 2000s, when this bridge opened, was considered to be a fairly a bit of a backwater. Actually, it was somewhere you went through on the way to somewhere else. Malmö was not considered to be a particularly nice place; had a lot of poverty, and it's been a massive deal. But it's also shown, I think, it created an appetite. It's one of the first kind of really successful big bridges in the world to actually go across the shipping lane. It completely changed the notion of what was possible. Unfortunately, it also meant that that's why people are suggesting bridges to Northern Ireland, because they're like, well, how can it be? The Øresund is a comparatively narrow, shallow channel, whereas obviously to sail from Scotland to Northern Ireland, you're sailing across a massive ocean trench, which I think is full of ammunition as well.
Yeah, it's a huge. They are. Yeah, we did an episode on this, and I pointed out that yes, crossing water is possible, but this is a different endeavour entirely.
Yeah. And it was a big project. I mean, so the island you see on the right hand side there, that's completely artificial. It's called Pepperhorn, and that was made out of spoil, which was dug partly from the tunnel and partly imported, I think. And this project was so big, it actually changed the flow patterns in and out of the Baltic. So when they built this bridge, and when they built the island in particular, and there's a tunnel that runs the last bit for the really big ships to pass, they actually did some measurements, and water started behaving differently. So that because the Baltic has this very narrow opening, there's only really two ways into it. One is through the Øresund, and one is by going around the bottom side of the island of Fyn in Denmark, where Odense is. You make small changes, and you really alter the way the water goes, because everything that's coming in and out of the Baltic has to go through this passage. But the bridge has been such a big success, nobody can really imagine undoing it now. And people who were opposed to it originally on cost grounds now pretend that they weren't, like all successful projects.
Yeah, quite.
It's a bit like the people who are against the Channel Tunnel. The idea that we wouldn't have the Channel Tunnel now is ridiculous, because it is so important to Britain's economy, and to people have got used to being able to get a train from London to Paris, no questions asked. Very similar vibe here. The idea that someone in Malmö would not be able to go to Copenhagen, to like have a couple of beers with a mate of an evening is just not even thinkable.
Yeah, shout out to Alan Joe, my friend Alistair Temple, who's in Malmö at the moment. Has been there for years and years, in fact, and I've yet to visit. Alistair, I'm sorry, I'm a bad friend.
I know Alistair.
Ah, yes, you'll know. Yeah, you'll know him from Twitter and possibly elsewhere. Yeah. Shout out to Al Temple. Hello. But it's very much. This is what's funny about this actually is that it's shown everyone that Germany has some of the worst high-speed rail in Europe because I want to be able to go to Sweden by train. The slowest bit of that is Germany now. Because actually it's quite quick to get across Sweden. It's quite quick to get across France. It's not quick to get across Germany. Germany's the slow bit now.
There's a really big missing link, and it's because the Danish and the Dutch and the German governments have never got together to build a railway from Hamburg to Amsterdam, right?
Yep.
So with the HSL Zuid in Netherlands, which I think John Stone has spoken about. There is, there's now basically a high-speed railway all the way from London to Amsterdam. You would need to build one to Hamburg, and then soon there's going to be with the Fehmarn link that they're building between Denmark and Germany. There'll be a higher speed railway from Hamburg all the way to Copenhagen. So you could feasibly run a train from London to Copenhagen in about, I want to say, 7 hours, 6.5 hours if you were fast.
It's bliss.
Assuming that modern high-speed trains go at the best part of 170 mile an hour. So, I mean, you're the expert here, Gareth, so feel free to correct me. But
no, that's that gap, the lack of connectivity from Amsterdam onwards in this direction is a real pain in the backside, and it could be fixed. Interesting fact from Gustav. Gustav says Pepperholm was not seeded with anything, by the way. All the green has spread there on its own. It's basically a big experiment. That's very interesting. I like that. That's nice. That's this thing here, this funny shaped, funky number. All seeded of its own. That's quite interesting. I like that. It's a good fact. Anything else you want to say while we look at this spectacular structure and I get rid of all my scribbles, or shall we continue on our
Let's
voyage?
move on.
Let's move on. Let's do it. Crikey, it's 1957. We might run on a little bit. Hopefully, Dominic, that's all right with you. Here's another picture. I like this picture. It's just a nice curved bit of track going over on a viaduct over a bit of water with some trees in the background, which is a familiar sight. But tell us about this. What is this?
This is Botniabanan, which is the Bothnia Railway, I think it's called in English, and it was something that had been on the cards for a long time. And I mentioned it earlier. What Sweden did it built a brand new high-speed railway up the east coast because transport connections were so bad, and it meant that when it opened, it went from taking instead of being a 14-hour journey, it became a 6-hour journey to get from Stockholm to Umeå, which is the really lovely city on the northeast coast of Sweden. And it means there's now I think 4 or 5 trains a day direct, and it's completely changed the way people conceive of the city. Umeå is probably about the same size as somewhere like Dundee. It's not a massive place. But it's the capital of the north. It's the last.
Dundee's big enough to be nice, so I can imagine. It's
got potential. But it's the last big place as you go north in Sweden, basically. So it's a bit of a focal point for the rest of northern Sweden as well, and that people will come down from the interior, to do business. There's a university there. People come into town for a couple of days. It's a really nice place to hang out anyway. And I was on this train the other day, going up to do some work there, and it just really struck me that it's we could have this. We could have one of these run into Inverness if we wanted. Yeah. But we've chosen not to. And it really hammers home that, these things are fundamentally political choices, right?
Why are we spending... We're spending enough to build a high-speed line to Inverness on dualling the A9. It's a thing that people often say, we can't... Yeah, but you've got to dual... No, you don't have to dual the A9. You don't have to do that. Not a penny of that need... As soon as the average speed cameras went up, not a penny of it needed spending. And all of that could have been spent on a high-speed line connecting from Perth up to Inverness. Why didn't Scotland do that? And it's deeply frustrating.
You'll be a fan of this, Gareth. In that this line, what it's actually done is on the much slower, curvier inland line, it's freed up loads of freight paths.
Yeah, of course it has. Yeah,
there's now loads of freight trains that can rumble along at 70 kilometers an hour inland, and all the passenger trains are zipping up and down here. So there's been a big debate about whether or not it was worth it to build this line economically. And people who live in the area say it definitely was.
Yeah, for
It,
sure.
it hasn't broken even. It hasn't come near to breaking even on its own terms. But if you look at the way it's changed other aspects of the economy, and like I say, basically created a double track railway through northern Sweden, albeit spaced 100 miles apart. That's the real payoff. And what they also did, which was really cool, is they took the opportunity to completely revolutionize all of the trains in northern Sweden at the same time. So
nice.
You've got a company called Nordic, who are the regional railway company, and they run trains all over northern Sweden, including up into the Arctic. And they're brand new trains. They've got little coffee stations on, staff there. They've even got this kind of lounge area where you can just go and hang out if you want to get up from your seat for a bit. They're really, really good, and they're subsidized as well. So they're relatively cheap, bearing in mind that some of these journeys are 3.5, 4 hours long. And it just goes to show that, if you've got the political will to basically not abandon a large tract of your country because it's not paying its way, you can do these things. But it's I think it's easier in a climate where people aren't so afraid of like large public projects, basically.
Yeah, there's just this pathological fear right the way down through the strata of society in the UK about anything that's resembles a major project like this. And it's not just NIMBYism, it's not just cowardice at the top. There's something that really does stretch right the way through our society that prevents us from doing this sort of intervention, whether it's a physical intervention or indeed, a state intervention related to welfare or other things like this, which is ironic given that we have the NHS, which is the single greatest thing the UK ever created.
Yeah.
The best thing we ever did, and we seem to be afraid of ever attempting to repeat it for anything else.
When we get to the next slide, or one of the other slides, I'll talk a bit about Bradford. Because I think there's a nice connection to be made here.
Nice. Yeah, do it. Right, so this nice little picture, we're going to hop to another nice picture, which is of freight. We have to talk, I was going to say, we'd have to talk about heavy freight in Sweden, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
So this is the LKAB. So one of the other big reasons that Swedish government is kind of minted is that it owns this massive mining operation in the north of Sweden, which is one of the world's biggest iron mines. So, if you want to make steel, you've got to buy iron ore, and, Sweden sells it. So there is this huge industrial operation that runs from Kiruna in northern Sweden over the border into Norway, where there's a big port. And these trains go back and forward 24/7, carrying the iron ore. If you look carefully, you can see the wagons are actually specially strengthened. They've got 3 wheels, 3 axles to wagon, because the ore's so heavy.
So are they on articulated bogies? Actually, yeah. They look like it.
Some of them are. They keep changing, but they've got very high axle loads. And these trains. These trains. I'm on a railway podcast. I need to be more specific. These locomotives are
they're insanely powerful.
When they were built, they were the most powerful in the world. Because this is not coupled back to back; these are the same locomotives, so they run as a pair. But as you can see, there's 2 pantographs up, so they're drawing a lot of power as well. This whole railway has been really heavily upgraded to have really durable electrical systems as well, because they are drawing so much power. But these things are all around the clock, and it's the kind of secret of one of the secrets of the Swedish economy is that they've just been keeping the world in steel for years and years and years. But this thing is this kind of, you go to northern Sweden, it's like a state within the state, in that a lot of people work for this company. So they either work in the mine or they work on the railway, and the company runs its own trains. This isn't the National Rail Company. This is the mine operator. But it's like, it's a bit of a difficult thing, because in some ways, mining is really destructive, and there's big environmental problems as well. But at the same time, the amount of money it creates pays for northern Sweden to have public services, hospitals, passenger trains. All of the other stuff that goes on is dependent on this sort of super system. And it's a really nice, I actually wrote about it in my book. Actually, I was up there and went down the mine and spoke to some of the local people, and didn't speak to the train guys of that, but about the importance of this. And it feels a bit like it's kind of gone from the UK now, but how in the UK there used to be sections of the country where everyone did work in the same factory and everyone was reliant on one industry, and there were just these huge, rail yards with trains departing once an hour carrying whatever they were carrying. So it's a bit of a throwback actually, but this mine it's got an interesting story attached to it because it was the ore is so valuable that they decided to carry on digging the seam. The problem is the seam goes under the town. So they decided to sacrifice the city of Kiruna for the sake of mining. Because the mine makes them so much money, they could afford to pay for the whole city to be moved. So what they've done is they've built a brand new city about 4 or 5 miles down the road, which on some safer ground. And over the next 30 years, the current city is basically going to fall into a chasm. Yeah. Which I wish that would happen to lots of cities actually, but the current city is going to fall into a chasm in the ground as the earth underneath it is undermined. If you go to there's another city in northern Sweden called Malmberget, which is next to Gällivare. These another one of these big mining towns, and there's large parts of the city there that just fenced off, and there's these massive sinkholes because they've dug too much. So you do really see the danger of what happens as well. But this is this sort of super system that runs all the way across northern Sweden is kind of amazing to see, and you can get a passenger train here as well. So if you get the sleeper train up from Stockholm to Norway, you'll go on the same line, and you really see it for what it is, which is you're so far north it's hard to believe, and then up here there's this whole mega system of trains going backwards and forwards around the clock.
It is amazing. I'm actually glad we have Gordon Gilks, who is exactly the person to speak to about this very subject, because firstly, as you intimated, the freight trains, and as Gordon has said, absolutely batter the OLE. But my belief, and both you and Gordon can correct me on this, is that these trains, they go loaded down, they spend a lot of time going downhill fully loaded. Yeah. And they generate enough electricity. It's almost like a perpetual motion machine, because if you just ignore the fact that there is a load of energy pulling the ore out at the top of the hill.
Yeah.
But they generate more than enough electricity to get the train back up the hill again and put energy into the grid. Gordon, can you fact check that? But I believe that's correct. I don't know if that rings true for you, Dominic. I believe that's
it's true in the sense that there's definitely not a huge drop off because if you get the train, you'll see this, especially once you get over the border into Norway, there's a bit of a climb up to the border, but it's a huge drop down to sea level from what's basically the top of a fjord.
Yeah.
And the amount of energy which you would through regenerative braking be putting back into the wires is phenomenal.
Yeah.
The other thing to say is that because the north of Sweden has so much hydroelectric power, these things are carbon neutral. So the energy that's going into the railways is all coming from hydropower. And that's one of the reasons why Sweden has been able to decarbonize so quickly, because it had really, really generous provision of electric power from a very early stage. And so, electric cars are taking off here in a big way because electricity is freely available. Also because the government haven't fucked up the provision of chargers in the way they have at home.
Yeah, I was going to say they've actually invested in the distribution network, which is something that the UK government just refuses to bother with. Again, Gordon, that's in your camp there. Gordon.
Yeah, but I mean, again, like these, this is a really high tech thing, and because of the way this company is run, because it's a nationalized company, they have a responsibilities to deliver profits to the government essentially, but they're also, everybody's very well taken care of. It's like corporate socialism actually. Wages are very high. Everyone gets good holidays, but they spend so much money in the local community as well. So a lot of the infrastructure spending that happens locally is paid for by this company and not by the government, because they've got the cash, and there is this kind of sense of, we should reinvest. If you compare that to the big ding dong at the moment in Scotland about the aluminium smelter in Fort William, which is about to be asset stripped and then given to the government at a loss, I think.
Yeah.
You see it's night and day, and it's entirely because, I think if a private company tried to behave the way that some of the British companies have done in terms of their social responsibility, they'd be left out of town.
The difference is, and it's not like they're squeaky clean. As you say, ore mining is not a hugely sustainable activity. It's certainly not it's environmentally destructive. But there is an attempt to offset that. There's an attempt to ameliorate that. As your book explores some of that discussion. I'm sure there's huge amounts been written on that discussion, but you can see that corporate socialism it's an interesting concept to explore. To what extent there's a corporate, to what extent that is just really that because it's an extension of the state, or actually because there is a level of corporate interest there. There's some interesting themes, I think, to explore in there, but also stunning bit of railway infrastructure. To be
worth a visit, and it also surprisingly cheap, given how far away it is. Surprisingly cheap to get up there, so worth the trip.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm just Dean and I have been formulating in our heads how we're going to do a Scandi trip, and I think we might just confine ourselves to Sweden, or maybe including Copenhagen actually, and just do a bit of exploration right up to the Arctic and get stuck in. The furthest north I've been is Bergen. I can definitely exceed that. So in Norway. So I can do more. Right. There is a map. Yeah. Everyone, there's a map, which is exciting.
This is I was going to say this is the Bradford of the North, but Bradford is the Bradford of the North.
That's it. Yeah.
This is a picture of Gothenburg, and I stuck this in because I wrote. To cut a long story short, I wrote my PhD about. It was a media PhD, but I wrote about infrastructure politics in Sweden and infrastructure and environment and like big developmental challenges and how they were portrayed in the press. But this is a project which is just about to really get off the ground in Gothenburg, and given all of the discussion about why they can't build a railway from Manchester to Leeds through Bradford and give Bradford a new station, the Gothenburg, which is big but not that big, I think Gothenburg city itself is about 800,000 people. It's got they're building this massive underground railway through the middle of Gothenburg, and it's costing loads of money, and building 3 new stations as well. And this has been on the drawing board for years, and it's not been uncontroversial. But when I read reports in the UK press about how this stuff can't be done because it's just not feasible, like we've got to ask yourself, well, actually, what it is feasible, because other countries are doing it with far smaller economies of scale, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, Gothenburg it's a bit bigger than Edinburgh, but like not much bigger. But, the government and the regional government basically decided that this is something that needed to happen because the railway station was so congested, and because the Gothenburg's like quite an old-fashioned station where you have to go in and reverse out again.
Yeah, it's a terminal. Funny that, everyone. Look, it's a terminal station that is being turned into a through station. Manchester.
Yeah. What the Germans call a Kopfbahnhof. And it's and Gothenburg station is lovely, really beautiful building, but it's not fit for purpose. And they've done a similar thing in Malmö where they've turned a terminal station into a through station. And in Stockholm, although Stockholm was never a terminal station, it had Stockholm Central had a real bottleneck at one end where there's a bridge across one of the lakes. So they've just built an underground kind of crossrail style station there as well. So very soon, all 3 of Sweden's biggest cities will have one of these in, whilst the UK, doesn't really have one outside of London. And this is, when you bear in mind the UK, I think is still, despite Brexit, like the 8th, 9th biggest economy in the world.
It's just embarrassing. I pointed this out in the select committee. I was like, other countries are making decisions that it's worth investing in public transport infrastructure in their cities. Why are we not? There's no response. It's just a lack of imagination, a lack of ambition for the country. It's just because basically politicians of all colours and stripes, unfortunately, just don't think it's worth investing in the country. It's just as simple as that. Lack of imagination, and it's depressing. But it's the more examples we can throw. You just got to basically embarrass. The only way to get the government to do anything is to embarrass them enough to get them to do anything. And they're very difficult people to embarrass, frankly.
And also, I think that if you go to Malmö, especially, you really see the difference it's made because, like I say, Malmö used to be quite run down. And there's bits of the city now which weren't up to much, where now there's, these new regional stations where you can get on a train, not to really far away places, but either to Copenhagen or to one of the kind of other nearby cities. And so it suddenly meant that, people want to live in these places. They want to go out there. They want to spend their money there. And Malmo, I mean, in my lifetime, I went to Malmo for the first time in about 2003, maybe 2002, and I thought it was crap, because it was really boring. It was kind of run down. There was nothing going on. And now it's probably the hippest place to live in Sweden. And young people want to live there.
All the cool kids live there. Al's girlfriend is very, very cool. She would not move to Malmo if it was not a cool place. She goes to drum and bass gigs and stuff, you know.
I'm moving to Malmo on Monday, so I'm hoping it's going to brush off on me. This is my last couple of days in Stockholm for the time being. So it's nice to see how much it has changed and how much kind of some of the cosmopolitan vibes of Copenhagen have brushed off on Malmö as well. But I think really the thing to understand about something like the Gothenburg project is that, you know, it's not been easy. It's costing a ton of money, but you know, these things pay for themselves in various ways, and also the social benefits of this will be huge.
Absolutely.
And you know, that's just something you don't see in the UK. I mean, like, I've lived in Edinburgh on and off since about 2006. So, you know, Edinburgh is a city that is bursting at the seams, has absolutely terrible infrastructure. And every time someone suggests building something else, everyone's like, oh, we can't do that. And look, we've already built a tram line. Isn't that enough? And it's not enough. So it's really, I think, important to emphasize that, you know, this stuff is difficult. It's not, I think some people play kind of fantasy travel planner, you know, and they get a map out and they start drawing lines on it. This stuff takes years and years of planning and skill. But they do it because it pays off. And, you know, you'll point out again and again on Twitter, Gareth, every new railway line you build frees up capacity elsewhere. So Gothenburg is also one of Scandinavia's biggest container ports.
Yep.
And so this is also going to free up space for container trains to get to the harbour as well. So there's loads and loads of benefits there.
Absolutely. It's got to see the bigger picture. So much so. Yeah, right. There is another. We have this picture here with a variety of things going. Tell us what. So we've got an X2000. We've got some what look like some quite nice big suburban trains, maybe, or they may be regional trains.
These are I think these are intercity trains.
Oh, okay.
These are MTR trains. So.
Crikey! Yeah, they are.
Sweden
MTR.
Deregulated.
Oh God, yeah.
Sweden deregulated its railways in the early 90s. Well, I'll go back. In the early 1990s, Sweden had a massive economic crisis based on a couple of things to do with the value of the currency and the regulation of the property market and everything else. And it elected a right-wing government for the first time in quite a long time. And that government pushed through a number of reforms, one of which was deregulation or privatization of the railways. Now, it's a bit simplistic to say it was just them because there'd been some rumors about it beforehand. But anyway, it was... One of the effects of that is that for a long time, nothing really happened. There was some kind of attempts at private operators, and then, you know, no one was really ready. But as the rest of Europe has come on board, what we've seen in Sweden now is more and more of these private operators. So MTR, they run like an express train service from Gothenburg to Stockholm, which is a bit like the Lumo train from Edinburgh to London now.
Okay, MTR, by the way, is the Hong Kong metro operator, for anyone who's not familiar with that. They run Crossrail.
And they also run the Stockholm metro at the moment.
Interesting. Yeah.
But they, you know, and this has been pretty positively received. But there's a big debate in Sweden about whether or not, you know, this stuff actually helps, because at the end of the day, it's SJ that end up picking up the tab for a lot of the non-profitable stuff through the government as well. Whereas the private operators complain that SJ, you know, have an unfair market monopoly and that they can't compete with them. And it swings and roundabouts. It's like the old arguments between, you know, national airlines and low-cost airlines on the same routes. But because there's such a high demand for train travel in Sweden at the moment, it does kind of help a little bit in terms of providing stuff. And Sweden at the moment has a massive rolling stock shortage. So there is, unlike the UK where you have Roscoe's, so rolling stock operating company. Is that what? Yeah,
that's right, Roscoe's. Yeah.
In Sweden, actually, a lot of the trains are owned by SJ anyway.
Really? Yeah.
So if you want spare coaches, you have to go and ask SJ to give you some of their spare coaches and rent them. And although they can be forced to rent them to you, you know, they've still got a bit of a monopoly on that. So at the moment, because there's such a lack of trains available, you've got all these weird situations where stuff that's been in cold storage for 10 years is being kind of hauled out and refurbished and put back into frontline service. But the reason that can happen as well, and you'll like this, is that Sweden has still has a lot of old-fashioned engine and coaches trains.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Lots of local.
The what they call the RC locomotives, which are the kind of workhorses of Swedish railways, you see them everywhere, and they're actually the same as the ones you get in former Yugoslavia, the orange ones you get there.
Oh yeah.
They were built, I think, in the 60s and 70s by ASEA, and they're still going today in all kinds of places. So sometimes you'll go to the railway station and your train will turn up, and it'll be one of these like 1960s electric engines with like 4 kind of fairly rickety coaches on the back, which I personally enjoy, but not everyone
Maybe
does.
not the future, but it's an enjoyable experience for the nerds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's because for a long time the government didn't very effectively plan what was going on and just kind of assumed that the semi-autonomous rail company and these private actors would take care of it themselves. Sweden's actually had a bit of a crisis because although they've had some really big new projects, the general level of maintenance and investment in the wider network hasn't been as high as it should be. So there's loads of issues at the moment. You pointed out earlier on about some of that lovely antiquated overhead line equipment.
Yeah.
That's more numerous than it should be. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
And they're now playing catch up. So the Swedish government, the Swedish Parliament, has just passed a massive railway investment package, which is partly designed to deal with this. And it's because that for a while they played with the idea that railways should basically pay for themselves, or that they didn't need big direction, and they've learned their lesson, but it's going to take a few years to catch up again.
It's a lesson that the UK refuses. Oh, sorry, I'll correct that. It's a lesson that Westminster refuses to learn about the GB rail network. Different in Northern Ireland, of course. Right, so conscious of time, the last image. Tell us about this. This
is amazing, and I'm sorry if you would know this story, but I find it so funny. So this is how not to do Scandinavian railways, I suppose. A long time ago now, like 20 years ago it must have been, the Danish government basically decided that Denmark built all these new bridges, and so for the first time ever, it was possible to take a train all the way from one bit of Denmark to the other without going on a ferry. And so the Danish government were like, okay, well, now we can do this. We should probably speed up the connections a little bit more because people are going to need to fly less. They don't have to take the boat. So they commissioned these very expensive, brand new Italian high-speed trains.
Uh-oh.
Yep, exactly.
I know this story.
Yeah. And they arrived. And to cut a long story short, they just didn't work. Like, they kind of worked, but they didn't really couple up together. The doors kept not opening properly. They kept just randomly turning off for no reason. And they tried to deal with them. And eventually, I think they actually sold them to somewhere else completely. This train, as you can probably tell, is not in Denmark. No. This train is in Libya. What happened was the Danish government had ordered these trains, and the first train was supposed to arrive, and it didn't arrive. And the Danish government, or the Danish railways, were a bit confused by this, and they kept asking, I think they're built by Ansaldo, but they...
which is now Hitachi, that's the Italian builder in the north of Italy, right? Ansaldo Breda, who is now Hitachi something, I think. Yeah, I think.
And they were like, where's the train? And the Italians were like, oh, it's coming. Turned out what had happened was that Silvio Berlusconi had given it to Colonel Gaddafi as a gift, and it had been taken to Libya at the behest of the Italian government and gifted to the Libyan government, and they had built this railway for it without any connection. So they basically on paper it was supposed to be the first section of Libya's own domestic high-speed network. And I think at that time it's because then Morocco was going to build one, and so Gaddafi was very keen that Libya should also have something. And then during this train went missing, and then during the Libyan civil war, which is a fair few years ago now it started, but a very intrepid team of Danish foreign correspondents went to Libya and tracked this train down and found it, abandoned, parked. Which was kind of, a fairly good symbol of the complete failure of the whole project. what Denmark's now done is it's decided to electrify its railways for the most part, and has ordered a fleet of new electric trains from a very safe. I think they're from Germany. I think they're Bombardier ones maybe. But this is kind of the flip side of it, which is that Scandinavians don't always do things well, and it's a bit of a myth sometimes that they do. There's been some catastrophic failures of political and industrial strategy in the Nordic countries, and so it's a kind of question of how much you even out, but even out with the good stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things that is really apparent is if you go to Denmark today, especially in rural Denmark, the trains are really, really slow, and they're very pleasant, but it's like being in rural Wales. You're not going to get anywhere very fast. You just have to enjoy the ride, and this is why. It's because 20 years of supposed plans went down the drain.
A big whoops. That is indeed a big whoops. And now, lastly, there is this map here, another fine map here with Malmö, Lund, Hässleholm. I can't do Swedish pronunciation. Actually, I have to take.
That's
over
pretty
from
good. Hässleholm.
Hässleholm.
I can't switch from one language to the other when I'm in the middle of a sentence. I have to go into Swedish mode. It's weird. It's because Swedish sits very differently on the tongue.
So is Gothenburg actually Göteborg? Is that
Göteborg?
Göteborg. Oh, because the G is a Y, of course. Göteborg. Yeah. Okay,
yeah. So it becomes like an old J sound, old Y sound. Göteborg. And apologies to any Swedes who are tuning in, because I've only been back in Sweden for a month, and so I'm still adjusting.
Don't blame it on me. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. This is a map of Sweden's high-speed network as it's probably going to be. So the final kind of design work on this is, or the prelim work is going on at the moment with a view to putting it before Parliament to make a decision on funding. But the idea is that eventually there will be a kind of actual high-speed network running all the way from Stockholm to the major cities, which will put Stockholm and Malmö less than 3 hours from each other, which will be a revelation.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
This will make a huge difference in Sweden. This will be country changing, I think.
Yeah,
genuinely,
it will be, and I think people don't quite realise that, because Swedes are very territorial, so they're quite used to not having a lot to do with each other. And what I really notice is that my Stockholm friends don't really have any mates in Gothenburg or even that many family connections, and vice versa. So a lot of people do move around. Of course, they move around, but there isn't the same level of interaction between the east and the west coast you might expect. And in fact, I've got a very good friend from Malmö who has never been to Stockholm because she left the country when she was 18 to go to uni in the UK, and just goes home to visit her parents and has never been to the capital. So. It tells you a lot about the way Sweden works. But also, the bit of Sweden we're looking at here is tiny. This is a quarter of the country.
Yeah.
There's
a lot more, that way. So, but this is kind of, if you like, this is kind of the urban end of the.
Yeah, this is.
And the reality, this also brings everyone up this end closer to all the other places as well. Anyway, through merit of the connections here, it does bring the whole country together.
Hopefully. I mean, in 15 years' time as well, hopefully you'll be able to get a direct Stockholm to Hamburg train, for example.
Nice.
Or you'll be able to get a Stockholm to London sleeper train, So, provided climate change doesn't get that bad, we'll actually hopefully have something to look forward to.
It's a beautiful thing. Imagine that, building a coherent high-speed network between your major cities.
But this is the thing. It brings us back to this eco-modernist dream. This is what we've got to fight for.
Absolutely.
And I think that one of the problems is that, I mean, I don't need to tell anybody on this podcast, but making transit sexy, making it the future in the way it was, is really important, because as soon as flights, and we've seen it already actually culturally, as soon as fossil fuels become anachronistic, there's a huge shift in mentality there in terms of, okay, well, what's the cool thing to do? What's the attractive option? And you see that, railways can do that. And I think that you see it with high-speed rail. Like it sounds really wanky, but like there's a real kind of phenomenological experience there in terms of like your contact with an idea of what's happening and like what what the experience of the future is when you take, the Eurostar to Amsterdam, or you take, one of the new high-speed railways in China or Japan. And that speaks to people in a way they don't always even realise, I think.
Absolutely, and I think that accounts for some of the nervousness about high-speed rail in the UK, because I think there is a reluctance among quite a lot of Conservative MPs to... It's not a grand conspiracy, but there is a natural reluctance over giving people a glimpse of what a major piece of state investment can do for people's livelihoods. That undermines a lot of ideology.
Yeah, I think it really does, and you can see it as well in the way that the UK government has really bought into all of the kind of gumph about driverless electric cars and stuff, and the idea that they basically mean we don't need to change anything else because these things will essentially, can be marketized and will solve themselves. And we've been told we're going to be having driverless electric cars for 10 years now, and they've not arrived.
Been getting told it for about 80 years actually, and they've still not arrived. So yeah, absolutely, it's yeah, and it was a point I was about to make actually, which is that we're at a bit of a tipping point certainly in the UK and the US. The US is already far gone, to be honest, on this, but the UK, that tipping point of in a way it's a tipping point not towards EVs and an entirely car dominated future, but we're at a potential tipping point away from that being the inevitable future, and there's a lot of pushback on that, and countries like Sweden show us the way it could be if we didn't have and don't get me wrong, there are a lot, Sweden has a lot of cars, it's a lot of car, lots of busy highways, lots of car problems, it's not perfect, but it shows what that tipping point of what the future can look and feel and smell and just the sensation of it. Rail offers that, and everyone on this podcast, most people on the podcast, probably get that. But it's a case of how we sell that and how, and I think using countries like Sweden where it is working, better, maybe not perfect, but better is the way that we can make that pitch. Dominic, that's been great. Thanks so much for that. I'm in fact going to go to our big faces. I will do. In fact, I tell you what, we'll come back to you. I'll do the end bit, and then we will, and then we'll come back to Dominic. If you've got questions for Dominic, line them up now. We've got. I'm 2 minutes. Wait. Where is he? I know he was on the call. He's David Frankel. I know I said 8:30, but you're watching this, so you know that I'll be joining you a little bit after 8:30. It's fine. Right. Audio only. This exists in audio only form. Hopefully we've done a reasonable job of audio describing. Rarely, I'm going to say I think this one will work quite well in audio only format. I know we've had pictures up, but actually I think this has been quite a nice, discursive sort of chatty episode. I've really enjoyed it. It's exactly as good as I hoped it would be. Patreon.com/GarethDennis to support this and make more of it happen and get goodies. PayPal.me/GarethDennis for chucking loose change and abuse at me, and GarethDennis.co.uk/Discord for more of the YouTube chat that's been going on in the corner. Hello, everyone. And the plug for Dominic is a utopia like any other inside the Swedish model. Dominic, tell us about the book briefly, and then also go find him on Twitter, everyone, by the way, as well.
The book was, it seems like a distant memory now, actually, but I wrote it off the back of my PhD, and it combined some stuff from my PhD, some sort of historical research, and sort of a little bit more sort of geekery, I guess, around modernism and the welfare state and all the rest of it, with some on the ground journalism I've been doing as a foreign reporter. And it was really fun to write, but it was, that book's only I think about 6 years old now. Actually, came out in 2016. And some of it's still true, but some of it's actually changed again. So I'm trying to get a publisher interested in doing a follow-up in some kind off the back of my time here now. Because I think that if you're interested in modernization and society, like Sweden's a lab basically for that.
Yeah.
And I know I was a bit critical earlier about like some of the utopianism of Sweden, but actually, if you want to imagine what a kind of sustainable, modern, socially progressive society looks like, it's somewhere like this you get the best glimpses into that. You see for those kind of fleeting moments what is possible, and there is a kind of slightly utopian edge to it. So, I think the book actually. The publisher keeps printing small runs of kind of 400 or 500 copies at a time. So occasionally I get a check in the post, so someone's buying it. But you can buy it on Amazon. I know as an ebook for quite cheap. it's like 3.5, £4 now, something. So I recommend doing that. Or if you order it through a library, I know it's available in lots as well. Yeah.
Yeah, go buy the book, everyone. And this wasn't a book plug episode, by the way, everyone in the chat. It just happens to. I like, it's a good book. It's worth picking up and having a flick through for all the stuff we've kind of discussed. Also, Dominic M Hinde with an E is the is Dominic's Twitter handle, so you can go and grab that. People have asked in the chat. Yes, so. Oh, also, right, okay, so the next week's episode of Rail Natter is a fun one, because it's episode 125. We're going to do another alternative history episode, which is what if the Intercity 125 had never existed, which I think will be quite fun. So hopefully I'll have enough time to pull a decent episode together. But actually the APT one I pulled together fairly quickly, and it ended up being even though it was quite early on, I think one of my favourite episodes. So that's next week. Episode 125. Good grief, we've done a lot of these. The 126th episode of Rail Natter, weirdly. Let's go big face again. Dominic, that has been really great. Lots of messages in the chat saying they really enjoyed that. I enjoyed it. It was a really interesting chat, really great. It's exactly as good as I hoped it would be. Anyone, any questions I missed? If you've got a question, at my name, and then it'll appear really clearly. Gustav is saying, being critical about the utopianism here in Sweden is valid, totally valid. Yeah, fair comment. Lots of people saying great episode. Thanks, everyone. Note the rail connections to Oslo from Sweden are crap. Yep, that's a fair comment, Gustav.
Yeah.
We've covered everyone's thoughts. We've captured it. No questions remain. Everyone's very happy after that, which is good, because I'll let you go have your evening back, because it's even later where you are than it is here. Dominic, that's been grand. Thanks so much for that. An absolute pleasure. You take good care of yourself, everyone. I forgot to tell you. I always forget to tell you. Hang about, because I'll chat to you after that. But when the credits roll, no one can hear us having our conversation. They are a little peek under the bonnet, everyone. Anyway, right. From Dominic and from me, that's a cheerio, folks. Cheerio.